Happy New Year 2021. We are excited at Let's Get to the Point because we are opening conversations and taking it to the next level here. So before we get right onto this, I just want to say, David, Happy New Year. Thanks so much for co-hosting this. Share with us a little bit about what you do, because I'm sure, you know, being in this current scenario we're in Los Angeles, California, I'd love to just kind of share that with everybody else. I'm more on a global approach here. And before we go on to that, you'll get plenty of my conversations going. And then we have Garland Fuller. Okay, so welcome to our show. But David, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you for that wonderful and warm introduction. Yeah, I am a commercial real estate broker, Reliance Style Investment Real Estate. We specialize in the small multifamily market in South LA and Orange County. Also a multifamily investor myself. In the next upcoming months, having a series of webinars that focus on adding value to multifamily investors in Southern California and keeping them abreast of the legislative changes that are coming from Sacramento that may affect the way they transfer ownership in properties, and as well as ways to sell property and defer capital gains. So that's what I have coming in the upcoming months. Thank you.
Amazing. Good to know that you have the upcoming webinars, and you know, looking forward to our collaboration on the Inner Circle. So I have this going on every Thursdays. You can go to launchyourwealth.com and Apple Podcasts. I have that season 2 rolling out. It's all about women entrepreneurs. And again, Garland, I'd love to hear about what you're up to. Last time we talked was during the holidays. So welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. My name is Garland Fuller. I am, I'd say, part of our hyperconnector, equity and inclusion strategist, leadership development partner. I am part of CBRE's diversity recruiting team here in Los Angeles. But I feel like because of, you know, board membership that I have with organizations like the African American Real Estate Professionals here in LA, recently joined the advisory board for REAL, which is the Real Estate Association of Latinx Professionals. And then, of course, my membership with ULI, specifically their Urban Plan Committee. For me, this year, it's about continuing to, you know, bring up the volume, amplify the voices. I've got a podcast called Full Circle with Garland that's on Spotify and Apple and all of the other places you find podcasts. This is a career storytelling platform that I'm creating in order to give voice to the hidden figures within our industry, in addition to provide you know, career advice for people who are starting their journey or in the middle of their journey and are wondering, you know, what do I do next? And my hope is that we can continue to, you know, bridge the divide between corporate and community within commercial real estate, because I think as I'm continuing to learn and unfold myself, I'm taking everybody along with me on this journey of meeting people who are doing amazing things with real estate, as well as just amazing things within themselves, because I think we're all learning and growing, and my hope is that we can inspire each other to keep doing the same.
See, I like the fact that you definitely hit on that note with, you know, opening the conversations and the hidden figures. You know, I love that movie. And of course, being a female and, you know, a woman in a highly dominated, you know, space that's pretty much ran by men. And this has nothing to do with gender, in my humble opinion. It's just my observation and the experiences I've had for 15 years plus in the making, in the world of entrepreneurship, business, real estate, and finance. You know, Forbes literally had an article that talked about 97% of the decisions made in buying a home is led by the female, by the woman. And 3 to 9% is our stake, our minority stake as a female, never mind being a minority, but as a female in management, in leadership roles. And so it's time to kind of, get uncomfortable in this topic, because it really is my 2021 mission, personal mission, to also open up in many of my conversations, whether it's at my podcast or inner circle events. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that diversity and gender, even more than diversity, that gender parity in commercial real estate is something that's sorely needed. In my experience, not only in the real estate industry, but in my previous career, which was the commuter rail industry, every leader that I had that was female probably lost my best management. And that's something that's surely lacking in commercial real estate.
That's,
Yeah, no,
I can relate. What's your take, on this particular conversation where we're talking about, being a broker, being in real estate specifically, if we want to, uncover more on that. And I do realize why I can say I can relate from the other side. So multifamily space, you're talking about, working with other people in partnerships and JVs. And I feel like my entryway was like, I was looking for somebody like me. I couldn't find one. So, just imagine going into, the brokerage world, being a broker, navigating your way through the business. And, with David mentioning that earlier in our chat, talking about some of the brightest people that you will find in this industry happens to be looking like him. So, that could be, a sensitive topic, but I'm willing to uncover that because I'm in my own journey. I'm trying to find somebody that looks like me, maybe not looks like me, like long hair, but I'm saying someone that can represent and I can look up to. And I'm still in that discovery phase. And so for me, I feel like I have to show up to be accountable to the 2 daughters that I have, and also my 4 sons. So that kind of feeds off the energy that I have when I'm networking and looking for potential or, possible partnerships, because I want to feel like there is that discussion and that it's okay to want to have that discussion and recognize that, I may not be, what your usual norm, right, in those groups and people doing, that kind of work where you're talking about, $1 million, multifamily syndication and things like that, right? You may not find someone like me. So I like your take on that, Garland, because I know, you're in this particular space. What have you seen that kind of touched on very similar stuff like this? Did it concern you? What was your opinion on that? Silently, I guess.
Yeah,
Not anymore though.
So when I got into commercial real estate, I did not know what I was walking into. Meaning, like, I had no idea the industry was as not only from a racial standpoint, a very white male industry, but I did not realize that even from a gender standpoint, there was very few women. It wasn't until I'd say my first week of work that I walked around the office and was like, oh wow. So, and I'm in Los Angeles. Like, this is a very diverse city in terms of ethnic diversity. Southern California has a plethora of people from Latino backgrounds, having lived in Northern California, and here there's a large Asian population here. And so when you go into a workplace that doesn't reflect the city that you live in, you kind of start to wonder, okay, what's happening here? This is kind of, to me, an anomaly, meaning like there's other things at work that are allowing this to occur. Because prior to this, I had worked in other industries and that was never something I had to worry about. So it was really just initially just kind of like, oh, wow. And then as I continue to, do my role in recruiting, which talent acquisition gives you an opportunity to really get into people's biases. When you look at a person's resume, how you determine whether they're qualified, how you determine whether they are professional, how you determine the pedigree of their degree. All of these things start to come up. And so you realize the blind spots or just biases in general people have about whatever those things are. And so I then started to realize, oh, so we're just hiring versions of ourselves. Like we are looking for people who remind us of ourselves, the halo effect or the horn effect in the opposite direction, where like attracts like, right? If you have someone who has, oh, you went to the same school I went to, oh, you were part of the same, sorority or fraternity I was a part of. And so we do it. Honestly, we all do it. Like everybody does it. It's like part of how our brains make quick associations in order to process information. We all have blind spots. But I think when it becomes very apparent is when you're in situations where you are in homogeneous rooms and you realize, oh, we're really not having conversations that really have innovation or any kind of other way of looking at things, because we're all thinking the same thing. We all came from the same place. And so what I'm realizing is happening in commercial real estate, because it's been a very insular industry, right? Friends, family, who you know, has been a big part of how business gets done. It's also been a big part of, who you decide to bring into things. And so now that the demographics are changing in not only the country, not in our world, I mean, globalization means people are everywhere. And so if your business is going to continue to sustain itself long term, you need to be thinking about the whole. You need to be thinking about all of the, demographics that make up your city. And real estate is still very much, corporate spaces. When you think of commercial specifically, it's corporations, whether they're going to occupy the space or invest in the space. That is what it is. But the corporations are now changing as well. And they're being asked and mandated to look at what are our numbers and how are we doing diversity as an organization? And then the third party suppliers and advisory services that we're seeking, are we, incorporating that into our diversity plan? And I would say, especially, of course, as a result of, last summer's George Floyd murder, Breonna Taylor, the uprising in a variety of cities across not only the country, but the world, being in pandemic, allowing people to actually have the space to take it in, to see it, to feel it, to realize what they know and don't know about what BLM really was about, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has been around since 2014, 2015. And it's only this year that it's become this word that hasn't had this, extremist piece to it, right? So I feel like we are on a journey as an industry. We're on a journey as the people who make up that industry, because I don't feel like industries are made up of people. Companies, organizations, everything is made up of people. And so the people are now starting to look at themselves and reflect a bit more and realizing, oh, we are looking at our board, we're looking at our leadership, we're looking at everything. And then, as you were saying, in terms of your space, syndications and multifamily syndications and that entrepreneurial space, I think people who are getting into that space have always been thinking about that space as a path to financial freedom. Like that's what I hear the most, right? I want to have control over my money. I want to have control over my time. And I want to do it in a smart way that I feel like I have ownership, and ownership in a variety of ways. When you hear that word ownership, right, it like sets off alarms for me, at least when I hear it. And what I think, and that's a conversation I think still to be had in your space, is what does owning in a community that you don't live in look like? What are you impacting when you're owning a community that you're just seeing as a dollar sign on a balance sheet? What does it mean when you are deciding to go into an area and you're just looking at the returns, but are you looking at what does this mean in terms of potential future gentrification? Are you looking at what this means in terms of, whether you're building something that's going to be sustainable? I don't think I've heard those conversations in those spaces. I'm not saying they're not going on. I just don't think that they're happening. I know that it's happening with people of color in the space. Social impact is a big piece of why a lot of people get into it, whether it is to do affordable housing, whether it is to do some kind of senior housing, veteran housing, or doing something to give back to their community. Social entrepreneurship. I know a lot of social entrepreneurs of color in the multifamily syndication space, because they do see it as a path to generational wealth. They also see it as a path, as opportunity to like take their family with them. I hear family a lot more and community a lot more. But sometimes when I'm in the rooms with the, typical white male conversation, sometimes it's not focused on that. I'm not saying never, but that's not usually the first point that I hear. But I'm hoping that these conversations and doing, podcasts like this start to make maybe people think about it a little more. Like, oh yeah, I never really thought about when I, bought a multifamily unit in Detroit, what that might mean for the people in Detroit.
You said a lot of key points. I mean, I can rant on that, but we don't have enough time. But let me point this one out. You will be hearing that here, because I even set that goal last year for my podcast. So, being on this is really the collaborations, right, of these conversations. I mean, a lot of people that's probably going, what are they really talking about? It's going to be hard for them to relate if they haven't experienced that, if they haven't been in that place. So, let me just use me as an example, right? Sometimes people ask me, oh, how is it like, coming from Canada? We hear good things about living there and this and that. And what's your take, seeing America, And one thing I really didn't think about was this, because, the Canadian culture is like, we try to include that. When you're applying for corporate America and work, it's like literally a disclosure on the bottom of that application. It's like, we don't discriminate. You could be with a disability, man, woman, whatever. It's like, it's highlighted there. So that's one thing that made me realize, I'm like, oh, okay, this existed. Like, I guess I didn't realize that because I grew up with that. And then coming here, I'm like, I've not seen that. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's sort of a personal experience.
Jonah, Jonah, I think the difference between Canada, from what you kind of shared with me over the period of our friendship, is that Canada executes what America pays lip service to. So we have that same disclosure on our applications. We won't discriminate based upon race and gender and all of those things. But is it, done in good? Is it executed here? The reality of it is historically no.
It's the paperwork. It's really
right.
The culture, the organizational, management, and how they're structuring that. You're right. You could be right on that. But, coming from my experience is like, I didn't think about it because that was the impact it did for me. Is I just expected that it would be like that. But now when you go into this, specific niches, you start to question, like, what is the system? Who's in leadership? Like, who's making these decisions? Whether you're white, blue, purple, whatever, you hear that, like, oh, we're one world, right? Like, you're purple, you're yellow, I get it, but let's recognize that maybe that is just fluff, right? Like, let's get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So that,
So I think history is something we don't ever talk about because it's not taught very well in this country.
No.
It's taught from a colonialist, imperialist standpoint, right? I think there's an African proverb that says something like, if you tell the story of the, hunter, the lion is always going to look like the enemy, right? Versus if you tell the story from the side of the lion, you're going to get a different story. And so the problem with a single story is that you're only getting one lens. And so I think the history of this country wasn't taught in a complete fashion. And a lot of us had to learn it on our own, or learn it in college, or learn it by taking self-study to understand how a lot of systems have institutionalized racism into them. There's a reason why the Fair Housing Act happened in 1964. There's a reason why the Fair Employment Act happened. You know what I mean? So like, even though the Constitution says segregation and slavery and all these things are banished, people were still behaving the way they were behaving. And as a result, subsequent laws had to be made. I mentioned history because I don't think we know enough about it. It wasn't until I read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, which is a book that I tell people, if you're in this space and you have no idea how redlining worked, or you've never heard of redlining, you didn't know that there were restrictive housing covenants happening, if you aren't aware of, how one side of town is considered the other side of the tracks and the other one isn't, how resourcing, just in terms of how we even housed people and resourced them. I mean, all of this was legislated at one point. It was legal for the way things work to work. And so when you hear about, oh, it was just in the 60s, or, oh, it was, whatever it was, like, there are people who are still alive today who live that. So it's not that long ago. There are people who this is within their lifetime. And so when you think of the legacy, because I know people say, oh, it was back then, we're wherever we are now, but that generational wealth gap that exists started there. And I don't think that many people realize that there's a legacy to keeping groups of people out of a system and out of a process for decades, that then impacts their ability to build. And so even though maybe we've been 30, 40 years out of, some of these housing laws, the banking laws are still kind of problematic as well. There's lots of things that are problematic. And so I just want people to do their research and do their work. Like, don't go off of what I'm saying. Please do your research, because I did my own. And everything I'm saying is this man is a professor in this space, still alive today, still preaching the same gospel today, because I don't think we can talk about these things without realizing that there is a place that they come from, and that place is what we're trying to move from that place. And so it's not going to happen overnight. And people's unawareness of how systems work, and unawareness of how real estate works, and how banks work, and financial literacy, all of that is by design. That was all by design. And so now that we are claiming it back, I think in the information age, you can jump on YouTube, you can jump on a podcast, you can listen to a book, people can inform themselves. And I think people are doing that. And as a result, they're realizing, oh, this is available to me. I can do this. This is accessible to me. I can do this. And I think what's happening with this pandemic is we're having to now reach out to other people to find our communities, to find our people who have the same interests, who have the same background, who have the same, values, who want to see certain things. And so that's what I think is kind of exciting right now, is because we don't have noise of like your day to day. The pandemic is noise. Don't get me wrong, it is. But we're not having to commute in the same way anymore, travel in the same way anymore. And so it's giving us more time. Now, what are you doing with that time is personal, but I know a lot of people who are taking this time to connect with other people who align with their values, align with their vision. And I think that's what's kind of exciting about right now.
100% agree.
So, Garland, you touched on a lot of things, and definitely appreciate how well you're able to articulate candor, and just about the discrepancies in what America has created just challenges America has created for Black and brown people and how it relates to real estate. The Color of Law, to your point, is a great book for anybody who needs to understand the history of the displacement and redlining of African Americans in this country. A lot of communities that exist in California or just nationwide that were I guess now, high-end areas had some strong, at one point had a larger African American community. San Francisco being one, Orange County being another one, Manhattan, the south end of Manhattan being another one. And those are things people don't understand, is that historically those communities were displaced. Close to me in Manhattan Beach, there's a historically African American beach called Bruce's Beach that was taken, from the African American owners of that community. And I think that's a lot of things people don't understand. I don't know if I'm necessarily as optimistic about kind of the change in, with COVID, about people self-educating to this. I hope so. But I do agree with the point that a lot of people are trying to align themselves with like-minded people, especially, and I see that particularly in the real estate space. So, well said on all of your points.
Yes, it's the communities. I think, let me take it back a little bit, being, the Canadian and American, one of my goals or purpose is really to bridge the American Canadian, knowing that it's North America. Now, as a disclaimer here, we're not talking about being white, being Asian, being Black, just specifically like we're gonna, talk about it and blab like with no purpose. That's not what this is. So I want to just point out that, when you're talking about systems and leadership in corporate America, or, just the environment that you're in, not comparing, I think maybe that's not the right word, like in comparison or comparing it, if you want to, Canadian and American, it's really the same. It's really the same. I think the only difference is it's been sort of opened up where immigration and opening it to certain status, like if you're a refugee, if you're trying to escape, a war-torn country, we're very generous to accept that.
Well, Jonah, let me to interrupt. I mean, no. First of all, I'm going to say this, and in all candor, don't compare America and Canada. Canada's social system is based upon the UK. I mean, and based upon British and French, because that's where, it was originally, colonized by. And the difference, as well as America, but the difference between America is a refuting of British law. And there's the difference. America has created its own system, which is what's called, to be honest, is a false meritocracy. And the reality of it is it reflects itself in, particularly, industries such as the commercial real estate industry, where, the whole premise of what diversity is opening opening the opportunity of what commercial real estate brings to people in investment space or brokerage space, whatever, section you are in the industry, is that it opens you to larger opportunities. And then it would be elsewhere. So
not comparing in the laws. That's not what I was saying. It's in comparison, meaning when people look at us on the map, oh, North America, right? So it's a natural assumption. So you cross borders, you have that freedom, versus other countries, they don't have that easily made accessible to them. So, being in whether it's Canada or here, you can just easily travel. Culture-wise, because our governments, we're not talking about whether it's socialistic system or derived from the Britain. Yes, of course, growing up, that's what we had to learn. We wish we learned more than that. I can say that, like you said, Garland, teach history in a better way, right? Like not one-sided way. And that's really where that perspective growing up, I started to question. I said, there's got to be more than this, right? So what I mean by comparing, that's why I said it's not the right word. I'm more talking about, when you look at it, people assume, oh, Canada, US, oh, great. We have such great freedom and privileges. but we have our own struggles. And which is this? It's rooted from this. Where you go to other countries, right? It's a different scenario. It may not be about skin color or being people of color or slavery in their history. It could be just their class. Like, are they poor? Do they make money? Where are you coming from? Prestige family? Did you own, farms? Like, that's how it was kind of, in that kind of tribe, right? So if you go to China, I mean, they probably have their own struggles, right? It's maybe based on their status in life, right? It may not be talking about, well, your skin is lighter and, or the leadership is all made up of white men or women, right? That conversation may be a little different than what we would face in Canada and the US, because we are looked upon globally that, wow, like Canada, US, they're sisters, they're sisters in the map. So that natural assumption. So even when people talk to me, they're like, oh, how is it like, like they already make their own assumptions, right? Without me even opening the conversation. So what more when we're talking about here, the communities and how it's being taught at school and all of that stuff. So it's influencing those conversations at a young age. And then it's translated to the businesses, whether it's real estate or, corporate America. So the purpose of why I was sharing that is it just made me think about that, going back. Now, do you think in the organization, when you're talking about, being a broker, being in this commercial space, do you believe that it's leadership that maybe needs to kind of face this and say, we've got to do something about this and really open these discussions and kind of make a change, new decade, new generations to come? Do you think it's leadership, or is it really a more of, culture, like everybody else need to be a part of that? Like, do they want to, right? Is even probably the question. We can't force other people to want to talk about what we're talking about, but they could join us, right? But in the corporate level, do you feel that, or do you think that it's leadership, that it should be the leadership that's being, molded into this or somehow nurtured so that we can make some of these changes and open these conversations and hopefully in the long run change some of the internal systems, right? Whether it's in the hiring process, whether it's what are they looking for in the criteria, how can we make our organization, a lot more diverse, more, multicultural, more open to, to those kind of, topics and just a culture, creating a culture, right? Everything has a certain culture. So, when you come on my podcast, it's a certain culture, right?
Would you like to answer this, David, or start?
I thought I was more I wasn't clear where, Jonah, are you asking me or are you asking Garland? Sorry.
Either one. More like,
Okay.
do you feel that leadership needs to rise above that? Or is it something that everybody needs to come
I think
together?
we're going to have different opinions. So I want you to go first, David, and then I'll go second.
So, I mean, the culture, I'll just share the culture of the firm that I work for. It's it's young. I mean, it's predominantly white. That being said, there a lot of the people that are, it's not exclusively white, and I think it's more of a democratized environment, being that we're a boutique real estate firm. So it's one where you're given an opportunity to come in and ultimately rise up through the ranks based upon your production. Um, does that mean they're sensitive to diversity? Not necessarily. But are they willing to, do they hire black and brown brokers? The answer is yes. I think that's the best way that I can kind of answer that. And to, being pretty newer to Southern California, it's a different environment than some of the other firms that I work for. Because historically, I worked for residential firms as a commercial broker. So this is the first one I've been at solely, which is a commercial broker. So that's really my insight on that. I think that without, unless there's a change in management, whether it's office management or higher up, I mean, I think the culture is going to be the same. I mean, whether they go on a diversity hire for African American or, Hispanic or, Asian brokers, the culture is not going to change. I mean, the face of it may change some, but the culture is not going to change.
Yeah. So I think system wise, because people are part of systems. And this is, I mean, as I said with the book, like when you see systemically how the whole thing comes together, you realize why it's broken. Because the system is broken. And because the system is broken, everything else is broken.
It breaks us.
And so people are aligning to a system that they found or that they created, depending on who you ask. And so they're kind of following suit, right? We're doing what we were doing before because that's what we've always been doing it. Which is why when technology comes in to disrupt or something else comes in to disrupt, everyone's like, you know, scattering around and trying to figure out how to fix it or oh my gosh, how are we going to react to it? Because the idea that there was going to be a disruption wasn't even something you considered. And so I think this industry is no different in the sense that the leaders, they are responsible. So I'm not going to not put them, you know, say to be responsible, but they're following a script that they were given. And they're also trying to figure out how to change in a time when they have so much to learn, like they have so much to catch up on in terms of figuring out what this means and what it means to be a leader of diverse teams, what it means to be a transformational leader. What does it mean to, you know, have people who have different needs on your team and serve all of them, which means you have to grow. I mean, you have to grow to serve a variety of needs. And I think some leaders adaptable to change, willing to learn, will pick up the books, will go to the seminars, and some it's not going to be easy. Some are not going to be, you know, there's still a lot of people that think this is political. There's still a lot of people that see this as, you know, some kind of liberal versus conservative thing and don't see it as a human rights issue, that don't see it as an issue of, you know, being able to be inclusive for all people, civil rights issue, etc. And so I think depending on how you look at it as a leader will determine kind of where you fall. I also say whether you're grappling with this in your personal life is huge, because you can't start to think about a lot of different people and what their needs are and how to be inclusive and how to create a space of belonging and psychological safety if you're not starting to do that in your personal life. How are you treating your wife? How are you treating your daughters? How are you treating your, you know, neighbors, etc. And so some of this is a lot of emotional intelligence work.
It's like basic stuff.
I don't want to call it basic because clearly it's not. But it's
Clearly
definitely
it's not, but you would think.
But clearly it's requiring, I think, I think we're as a people evolving. And so we're, you know, the hard skills, everyone can learn the hard skills. The soft skills, which aren't really soft in my opinion, any salesperson will tell you the conversation, being able to listen, being able to respond appropriately, like that's the stuff right now that if you learn to master or you become, you know, very good at, that is a big part of what controls your success. We can teach you how to, you know, do a pro forma. We can teach you how to run an Excel model. We can teach you how to, you know, do a PowerPoint deck. Can we teach you how to have a conversation? Can we teach you how to listen? We can teach you tips and things on how to do it, but your ability to actually execute on that, that's you. And you have to do it in your own authentic voice, in your own way. You can't do it on a script of what the next person's doing because that might not work for you. So those are the things that I think, I mean, I feel like my hope is that we are going to try, this is why I'm here, it is like, let's start thinking about these things. Let's start talking about these things because it's not going to happen if we don't start to dig deeper and ask those types of questions and start to be a bit more reflective. And we can't blame each other and we can't blame the next person. And it's not this group versus that group. It's a all of us group, because we all have a hand in it in some degree. And I think we all have to look at power structures and who has power. So there's a lot of things happening, but I do feel like it's a systemic issue. And I think we're starting to look at our systems a little bit more now to see this myth of meritocracy, this myth of everyone starting at the same place and why everyone needs to make it, and the bootstraps and all of this. You're realizing we're not all coming to the table with boots. Some of us may not necessarily even be coming with laces. Like there's a lot of equity issues and disparities. And so if you're going to truly look at those things, you have to understand that, and it's not that group's fault. Like, can we just execute on some grace and some empathy? And this is the feely, touchy, woo-woo stuff that
I was gonna say the kumbaya, let's
that you never hear about in corporate organizations, because it's hard to have these conversations with your coworkers. It's hard to have these conversations with your colleagues. And it's hard to do this with sometimes people who, you know, don't even know what they don't know. And so this is why I implore people to find the experts who know how to do this. Find the people in this space who know how to do this, because expecting your Black and brown employees or your female employees to lead these conversations because of their own lived experiences is not fair.
It's not gonna happen.
They are carrying their own loads every day, and they don't have any more space to carry anybody else's load.
Yeah, that all of that was really well said. You know, can I point out one thing, Garland, and you know, in the transfer of power, I think the issue is that, well, at least part of that I've seen in commercial real estate is that giving, you know, being equitable in power always is not always the most easy thing to do. And it's what is the external motivation outside of being politically correct? I think that's a really important question, because why should I hire someone? Why shouldn't I give the same benefit to someone who looks like me, who may be my relative, you know, when I've been able to be successful for it, and that may be that child's birthright? You know, why am I going to give it to, you know, someone else who I have no connection to, I have no obligation to? I think that's a big question that commercial real estate has to, you know, come to terms with, or has to explore, to be able to do it willingly, instead of it just being, you know, I guess it's like taking a part of the zeitgeist of the times. I think that's really what the challenge is, because even to your point about, you know, African Americans having to, you know, carry the weight, it's really hard, even, you know, at the firm I'm at, to have those conversations with people. Not to get too much into politics, but a lot of people, you know, when I was in the office, you know, they were about keeping the current president in place, because they felt like a change would be, one, bad for real estate, and two, they just felt like socially that he would just be more problematic. And their experiences are vastly different than mine. You know, whether it be from our backgrounds, race, socioeconomically, just everything completely different. And older, as me being, you know, older than my median my peers as well. So that is another reason why those conversations are so hard to have, because the gap is so different. You know, regarding being optimistic for the future as far as equity, I think that have more faith personally in the younger generation. That being said, I still have more faith in the younger generation to include Black and brown people at the table in commercial real estate than I have the old guard. To be honest, the old guard, especially if they're not minority in the first place, it's what my experience has been personally and professionally, is that the older, you know, I don't want to say the end of the Generation X, and definitely the boomer generation, they just really seem to be the most resistant to change, or the most resistant for a paradigm shift, especially the male, you know, I'll just say again, the white male counterpart of those generations seem to be the most resistant to change. The ones that I've seen, and even my time out here, are the ones who are my age and younger.
Is it white male and female, or are you just making it sort of a general?
I mean, you know what? I haven't had the experience to work under, white females or just females in general. Unfortunately, in the real estate, well, I'll definitely say white females in the real estate space. Most of my real estate, experience, and especially in the commercial real estate, have been white male. The company I was with in Chicago, or the company that I'm with now. And the two differences, one is that the one in Chicago, the ownership was older, or the managing brokers at that firm are older. So, so that's definitely one thing. I think being at the firm that I'm at now, they're a little bit more open to listening to ideas as far as business growth, but are they places where they're open as far as like cultural diversity? As far as changing the way like office culture is, the answer is no. I mean, it's a very I don't want to call it bro type of culture, but bro type of culture with a Southern California context. We have pictures of surfboards and things, beaches all through the office. Music is loud, televisions are on. It's really geared towards young male demographic, young white male demographic. And no one tells you, okay, well, you know what, you can't be here because you haven't sold this amount of real estate, or because you don't have a relationship with the principals of the firm. But the culture is still pretty much the same as it would be anywhere else as far as commercial real estate firms, whether it's a higher tier firm or not.
It's interesting. I think because I have a closer relationship with leadership, and I like literally go to lunch with them. And I think because I see myself as a bridge builder. Like, I can't do this work and be binary, like one us versus them. And I think that's just by nature, like who I am outside of work. But I try to, again, put myself in someone's shoes. I always try to do that, to do this work, because I find that there's a reason they are the way they are. And when I sit down and talk to them about, to tell me how you grew up and where you went and blah, blah, blah. And so just hearing their stories, I realize, oh, okay, so this is why we are coming from different, places. And I try to share with them, one, my background, but two, just like question that, like question some of those things that you are taking at face value as, this. Like, question these things, because I don't think that generation ever questioned. They're not the question critical thinking generation. The boomers, they came out of the Depression. They were told to work hard. They were part of the Industrial Revolution. Like, these people are hardworking people. They know nothing if there's not hard work. And what they call hard work may vary, right? I'm not saying all of them are doing hard work, but what they call hard work for them was hard work. And so this idea that you now have technology to streamline and automate and improve. And so the idea of long hours and being in the office. I think this is why this pandemic has been so interesting, because work is still happening and nobody's in the office. And there's a lot of folks who were thinking, you got to be in the office. You got to be in the office. That's how we know you're working. And I think there's been a lot of shift in that, because they're realizing, oh, wow, people are still working. If anything, they're working more because they're at home and they don't have a commute and they don't have a set lunchtime and they don't have to pick up their kids from 500 activities. So there's just, more work happening. If anything, productivity might be like over the top right now.
Are you hinting at me? Are you hinting
no,
at me?
I know myself. I'm just like,
you said it. My husband is busier than I thought. Like, seriously, like,
and then you also are, for
500 activities.
For a lot of people, work is also like a place to, when you don't want to think about something else, you focus on your work, right? Because you're like, I can control my work and I can get my work done, and there's a sense of accomplishment. Whereas, and so I don't know. I feel like there is definitely some truth to what you're saying. I totally get that. I also realize that there are some leaders that I've had conversations with that are trying, that they are really starting to like do the deeper work and think about it. I think there are also leaders that, God bless them, as they say, bless your heart. Like there's no change that's going to happen there. That kind of life cycle is where it is, and there's adaptability at this point is not uploading. So I do feel like there's a variety, but I do also know that they're kids, because the amount of them that I know who said, my kid came to me during this whole Black Lives Matter and all of this, and my kids came to me and talked about this. So they're 20-year-old kids, they're 30-year-old kids who are far more savvy. The next, that generation who sees race and gender totally different, their kids are coming to them with this stuff and saying, Dad, you need to like get on it. Like, you need to go read White Fragility, Dad. Like I know a broker whose daughter told him, you need to go read White Fragility.
Well, and that's great.
So it's not a wave. It's not going to be this massive, like, but I think there are people like personal change and transformation, personal development is a choice. And the people who want to get on board, who want to be on the right side of history, so to speak, are going to do the work. If they're not interested, they're not worried about it, I'm not saying, don't talk to them, but I'm saying that's not my concern. I focus on the people who are trying to do the things to move the needle forward. If that's not your jam, maybe not this lifetime it's your jam, then do what you need to do. But the movement is continuing, whether you're a part of it or not.
You said it, the movement.
The great thing about, in your position, you are in a place where you're an intermediary, for lack of a better term. You're between someone like myself and, upper management at a commercial real estate firm, and you're going to be able to influence or, the way they perceive things, or you'll be able to have those conversations a lot more openly with them. But as a, as a broker, and as you're, I guess looking at what your career transition is going to be, as from, one firm, from a lower market firm to a mid-market firm to an upper tier market firm, you still have to run into those gatekeepers, and you're not going to have the same relationship with those gatekeepers, at least until you get into into that business and establish a, relationship with them. I recently read, Alpha Male, which is I guess a seminal work on commercial industrial real estate brokerage in the Inland Empire. And it was written 20 years ago, but even though it was written 20 years ago, it felt like it was written 40 years ago. And ultimately but even that being said, a lot of the things that they shared in that book, a lot of the practices, the old good old boys club, it still exists to this day in a lot of industry, a lot of, facets of commercial real estate, and especially in the brokerage space. So, I hope that those things start to change, but, I do kind of have a guarded optimism with that, that it's going to be something significant. I have more faith in, the younger generations of people who are my age and really under, who will be able to lead that change, especially as they move up the ranks. So my fellow brokers who, who may have got in through, I want to say, who look like the people who are in charge, I have more faith that once they move up the ladder, they'll be able to be more inclusive in the people that they choose to, hire in commercial real estate firms.
Good insight. Good insight. Good share. Good share. I mean, what's your concluding, message to those that are, younger and upcoming generations going into this industry? What would be your best advice for those that, should hear that?
Garland?
Well, So I still talk to students. I just last night had a UCLA. I was at UCLA's career fair for their, Latino Business Association and their Black Business Association. They did a joint career thing, and I love being in those rooms because it gives me hope that the next generation, they see real estate as a path for them. And I show up in those spaces so that they know that it's a path for them. I think what I always tell them is, I'd say three things. One is, get your technical skills, like know your stuff. Because when you know your stuff, nobody can tell you anything. And you can spot BS a mile away because you know your stuff. Number two, get a network of people around you who are going to support your dreams, support your vision, support your ambition, provide you with the mentorship and sponsorship and whatever you might need in order to navigate these spaces. Because it's not going to be immediate that we're going to see this change. And so you're going to walk into spaces where you are going to be the first, only different person there. And so you want to make sure that you have your people around you to continue to, keep you motivated. And the third thing is own your career. If you're somewhere where they aren't treating you like the gold that you think you are, find another place to go. And I think Black and brown talent, especially if you've gone to some really, top-notch institutions, they realize that they have marketplace value and they can pick up and go wherever they need to go. And so if you are somewhere where you're not feeling like you're being seen, you're not feeling like you're being, given the opportunities, do what you need to do, because toxic workplaces exist. There are leaders and managers who may not really see you for what you can do, and that's going to, stymie your career. So don't stay in places you're not wanted. And, own it, own your career. Those are my three things that I tell students.
Own your career. That's a really good advice. Whether you're in business, entrepreneurship, as an investor, as a broker, I think we've got to own it, right? That's saying, you got to go where you're celebrated.
Yeah, and I would like to just kind of add one quick thing.
Sure.
I think with Garland's optimism of the future, I think in a context from being in California versus being in Chicago, I'm a lot more optimistic about the future of diversity in commercial real estate in California. And I think it's, but if I had to project or advise my children, 20 years from now, what career to take on, I tell them to go into commercial real estate here, especially my eldest. What I tell them to do in Chicago, no. Chicago is it still has a long way to go, especially in the commercial real estate field. Garland's and shared this, but even the person, the people who even are in the position of the diversity role in some commercial real estate firms in Chicago are not for a minority. And I think that's just, for me, so I say all that to say that I am optimistic about the future of inclusivity and diversity in California versus other markets in the country. So I will say, that is something that I'm optimistic about, being here versus coming from where I came from.
Well, I mean, for me, I would say, I've been lucky enough that the people that I've met through this, experience and journey for the past 4 years, I mean, they've been amazing. So, the topic of being a minority, being a person of color or ethnicity hasn't really been, the pre-qualification of why they want to talk to me. So I would say I know a handful of that, but let's see what the future holds, because it's a different space. I mean, you're talking about, building partnerships and really owning that. That's a massive responsibility in that sense. So I would say, I think this conversation is very, very important to me, not just because, you know, we're talking about BLM and being here in California and all of that stuff. I think I look at it from my own ecosystem. You know, when my kids look to me and they ask me questions about history, and now as they're getting older, that's why I was just nodding my head at you, Garland, because my actual high school, who's headed off to college, he said to me, I don't understand why they teach this kind of history. It's like, why can't we face what's happening today and talk about that in the classrooms? And when you said that, systems, it's got to begin in the school systems, right? But that's a whole new topic, because imagine we're preparing the younger generation to tackle these problems that's been ongoing, may not be many, many years, hundreds of years, but it's enough to impact that, you know, the younger generation, and hoping that they can see something better. So that to me makes me feel accountable to share these discussions and do something about it, even if it's in a smaller scale, which is my ecosystem. Because for me, it's like, how can I lead my own kids and my own family if I'm not present for that? And so this topic to me is very, very important. And so to those that, you know, have connected with me, we've shared, you know, conversations like this, I appreciate you. And of course, David, I appreciate you co-hosting this and welcoming our 2021. Garland, I'm so glad you launched with us with this topic, or theme rather, on, you know, this upcoming new decade. We have so many more opportunities to continue this conversation, and for you to join us today. And so to all of our, you know, listeners, viewership, thank you again. We will see you on the next episode of Let's Get to the Point.